Hey, Jordan, how's it going?
Hey Rob, what's up?
I mean, there's a lot. There's a lot up. It's a big week. Big things are happening right now.
Yeah, I mean a lot of changes around here as well.
Yeah, changes around the office. And I've been looking forward to this. We've needed a shakeup for a while. We always want to be moving forward, right? We always want to make sure we're respecting the marketplace of ideas, free speech. We don't want to have any kind of unconscious bias on the program.
Right. Of course,
it helps to be called out for that kind of stuff. So that's why I would just want to send a big Insurgents hello to new board member Elon Musk.
Right.
Really exciting times. He's going to be stepping in, I think making things fun again over here. Mm-hmm. Really looking forward to it.
Yeah, he has pitched us on a lot of really good ideas, and I think his vision for the Insurgents, where to take it, how to make our brand stronger by appealing to just the worst people on the internet.
Yes, yeah.
I thought it was like a vision that I could really get behind.
Absolutely, yeah. The other main big change that we need to talk about is now for subscribers, for Substack subscribers. You're officially invested ground floor in Insurgents coin.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So buy the dip on that, because now you're in. It's a huge opportunity. Mm-hmm. It's a huge opportunity. There's a lot of difficult times for our generation right now economically. A lot of instability. What you need is a stable investment that will never ever backfire on you, that is not just there to benefit us primarily at everyone else's expense. You need something that's not that. That's why you got to invest in Insurgents coin by subscribing to the insurgents.substack.com.
And I think his vision of making a circulating supply of 4 quadrillion was just brilliant, because now with like a very small investment, you could be a Insurgents coin billionaire.
That's right. Yeah.
How many people can say that?
Not a lot. Not a lot.
No, but on our Substack, which we would encourage you to check out, theinsurgents.substack.com, we want to spend more time there with you all. So we've been starting these discussion threads there where we're all going to talk through some of the news of the day or the week, whatever. Monday we did one where we talked about Elon buying Twitter and what it would look like and what would moderation look like. Do you think he'll actually go through with it? Is he committed to these free speech ideals he's been espousing? Today we did one, we're recording on Thursday. Today we did one about Biden's potential student debt cancellation, and looking for your predictions, your analysis. Do you think it should be canceled? We would argue that it should. So join us over there at theinsurgents.substack.com to join the conversation, because we really want to. It's much easier there to have actual conversations about some of these issues than, obviously we can't talk here, or when either of us are on Twitch on our respective channels, or on Twitter, because Twitter is just not really a great place for long thought-out conversations. So I do like that platform for this.
It's in fact really bad for those long thought-out conversations.
Yeah, I actively avoid it, in fact.
Yeah, absolutely. It's awful. Anyway, on this subject, though, as well, we are talking today to Edward Ongweso Jr. of Motherboard about Elon, the possible purchase of Twitter, his whole fake wealth, what possible changes are going to be coming to Twitter. We had a great discussion about all this stuff, as well as some of this business about Biden potentially canceling student debt. Really good talk with Edward Ongweso Jr. That's going to be coming up in just a few minutes. Do we have anything else before?
Yeah, I mean, look, on the Elon thing, as you'll hear, I don't know how much is going to change. I don't think a lot will change, but I am hearing reports from people on the inside he's going to ban Ken. He's going to ban Ken's account once and for all, and for that, I stand behind him 100%.
Absolutely. This is a scourge that we've been trying to deal with now for over 2 years. And frankly, we've been talking about this and no one has been listening. No one's been listening to us. No one's been respecting our lived experience here when it comes to this. So thank you, Elon, for
They haven't seen us. They haven't heard us.
There's been no seeing.
Finally, Elon
hearing.
will.
Yeah, thank you, Elon.
Thank God.
Should be great. So again, folks, subscribe to the Substack if you haven't already. Get access to the bonus content. I have to go watch playoff basketball now. I'm very excited and nervous. So let's get to our interview with Edward Ongweso Jr. He's going to be joining the show right after this.
Now we're joined by Edward Ongweso. Edward, we ask the same question of all of our guests right off the bat, and it's your turn to answer. Edward, are you a gamer?
Yeah, I'm a big gamer.
Let's hear it.
There we go. Nice.
Right now I'm putting in the work with Elden Ring, of course, but I love me Crusader Kings, Hearts of Iron, Sims, the Total War games, Call of Duty, Halo, Fortnite, anything, pretty much any game. Shooters, strategy games, RPGs, build shit, all of it.
This guy loves gaming.
I love it.
Yeah.
Hell yeah.
Are y'all gamers?
Yeah, this is a gaming podcast.
Hell yes. Of course.
I've been trying to make it so, at least.
I've seen you on Twitch and play a few games, but I just wanted to, double check that we're all on the same page.
Yeah.
Yeah. The conversation usually ends if they say no, so.
Yeah.
Right.
In fact, once you played on Twitch, that qualifies you as being a professional gamer as well. So
That's true.
Yeah,
that's how serious we take this shit.
Yeah. Hell yeah.
So I did the early access for the new Magic the Gathering set the other night. They asked me if I would stream it, and I don't think either of you know who Day 9 is, but he's like a really big Magic streamer. He's been playing for like probably decades, just really, really influential in the community. But what they do is when they do this early access stuff, they invite all these people together for like a limited night where you get access to every card in the upcoming set, so you can kind of preview it and build hype around it. But then as a result, if you participate, you're matched up against like legends, right? And I got matched up with this guy on one of the games, and I saw his name like on my screen. It's like, you're playing Day 9. It's like, I'm gonna get my teeth kicked in. And I ended up
like
somehow...
the equivalent in Lord of the Rings when the Balrog emerges, and it's like, oh shit.
Basically. And I somehow I beat him, and like pretty handily. And that's gonna be, I think, the peak of my Magic the Gathering career. I recorded it from his VOD so I can get his reaction. I'm just gonna like play that at my funeral, please.
Damn.
Yes. And his.
Yeah, exactly. Damn, pack watch.
So Rob, you got a big night tonight.
Yeah. Very excited. Not a lot of people, Jordan and Edward, predicted the Raptors would make a lot of noise this season. And this isn't a sports podcast, but on this very podcast months ago, I did predict at the beginning of the season that the Raptors would make the playoffs. The Toronto Raptors. The playoff for round one matchup against Philadelphia, the first 3 games were an absolute nightmare. Pretty much the worst, most depressing outcome of every single game. Was absolutely horrible. Has since been turned on its head. The Raptors now tonight, heading back to Toronto, have the ability to force a decisive Game 7 to make history. First team to come back from an 0-3 deficit. Very, very exciting stuff. I'm very hyped. And all the analysts, all the experts, the so-called experts got this one wrong. And our little old me on our little old podcast had the correct analysis as usual.
Now, the real gamer question is, are you going to gamble on the game?
No, I'm not a big gambling guy.
Okay.
I just feel like I've thought about it. It's actually amazing how much, like, now that sports gambling has been, like, normalized, when you see, like, the ads when you watch these games, it's just all gambling shit.
On the subways, too. Everywhere. I was surprised by that.
Watching these NBA playoffs has just been all crypto and all gambling. I don't know what that says. I don't know what that says about society, but it's probably nothing good.
No, it's fine. It's fine.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's all fine. That's the thing. I'm not very good with money to begin with, so it's like I don't need this. I don't need to add that wrinkle into my financial situation. Trying to go at full Adam Sandler and Uncut Gems. That's where I'm going to end up if I start going down that path. So,
Yeah.
Honestly, phenomenal movie though.
At Game 7 though, if they force it, I'm going to be, that's history right there. You understand? That's going to be me. That's what I'm going to be saying to everybody.
This is how Rob wins. Edward, do you have a team that you're pulling for in the playoffs?
No, I grew up, and when I got into NBA growing up, I'm from Oklahoma, so it was OKC. But in the playoffs, no, I'm just watching it and maybe making bets based on what friends say, if anything. Little tiny bets. But yeah, nothing. No real motivating like this or that team this time around. I think I'm just along for the ride.
I'd love to see Memphis win.
Yeah, they're a lot of fun. It was nice last year. I remember when the Raptors had that really bad season in Tampa because of the pandemic. It was nice actually to be able to watch the playoffs without the emotional ties, without the deep roller coaster ride of the back and forth drama, and being able to just kind of dispassionately enjoy the game and not get too worked up about it. It was a nice little respite for 1 year. But now I'm right back being fully emotionally invested in this stuff. And
now you are going to get stressed out.
Oh, I'm going to be I'm stressed already. And I haven't even started yet. So. Yeah. Anyway, we love to start the pod off with a little chit chat about gaming, sports, or that kind of stuff. But Edward, we brought you on for a very specific purpose. You do a lot of great work covering the tech world. Big tech story this week, obviously, with Elon Musk possibly on the verge of buying Twitter, which has been a pretty interesting roller coaster over the last week or so. What do you make of all this, Edward? What's your takeaway after the last couple of days of craziness with that? Is this deal going through? Can you help us break this down?
Yeah, I think the deal is probably going to go through. It's hard to imagine it doesn't for a few reasons. One, Twitter is pretty important for Musk, not because he cares about free speech, but because it's where his supporters live. That's where a lot of the amplification of his business goes. Whenever he tweets, something gains market cap or monetary value in a way that it doesn't if he actually works on it. So it would make sense for him to just buy it. And tinker with it. And as some people have commented on, because he's taken out loans against Tesla stock to guarantee financing for the purchase of it, he's not going to tinker with it too much where it changes and it can't yield him that amplification effect. But he'll change it probably enough where it's a little bit of a money maker and he can begin to pay down the interest and eventually the principal, on some of these loans that he's had to take out. It's like $25 billion in debts and $21 billion in financing of his own, right? So, he has incentive to take out the deal, has incentive to make some small changes to Twitter, but not too many, because Twitter, as it is right now, the health site that we all love, is really good for him. He tweets, and a lot of people love it. A lot of people dunk on it, but much more people love it because he's done a really great job at cultivating fandom, cultish followers, a pretty impressive, network of people who probably would die for him.
The infamous weird nerds of the Elon meme that we always see every time he comes up.
So I think that's really it. It's probably gonna happen. He's probably gonna make it work for him, and probably nothing's really gonna change because he's kind of similar to Jack Dorsey. I think what will change is probably, like, as we've been seeing over the last week, some individual Twitter employees are probably going to be targeted for harassment. And individuals will probably be targeted by harassment because of his tweeting and the toxic dynamics around his following. But that's also something that happens and goes on anyways. Those same people are also harassed by conservatives and right-wingers for things that they did that were perceived as part of a conspiracy to silence right-wingers.
You already see kind of an emboldened nature and tone from the right. They also seem to think that it happened immediately, which I find pretty funny. Just
we got 6 months.
It's just hey, Elon took over. Let's go. that's kind of not how it works.
It's been funny to see people who are like, oh I'm suddenly getting retweets again. Did Elon Musk flip a switch? And it's like, no.
He did the Thanos snap, and all the shadow banned conservatives were immediately brought back.
But
idiots.
I mean, that's just, they game the refs that way.
Right.
Like always complaining about being shadow banned, by always insisting that Twitter's unfair to them. In actuality, Twitter did an analysis of its algorithm and found that conservative content performs well. It gets an algorithmic boost. They released these findings publicly last year or the year before, and nobody on the right cared because it didn't fit into their grievance narrative. But that's the reality. They do fine on Twitter. And despite that, they're now claiming that like they're suddenly free from this tyrannical algorithmic burden, that they finally now are having their tweets seen and heard. It's just it's ludicrous. But I some of the other stuff has been really problematic, like some of the rhetoric, the tone. Like Charlie Kirk just tweeted out today, like white people are under attack in this country, which is just like they're just gonna go all out with this, I guess. It's just really gross how emboldened they feel.
Yeah, I think that it's interesting, or we'll have to probably wait a little bit to also see what that emboldening is gonna translate to additionally, right? I'm curious if I'm wrong, and like it's not that it actually, or not that there aren't, and I'm wrong in, or to back up, I'm wrong in thinking that there won't be immediate changes, but actually, like you said, because they're emboldened, they end up running a bunch of people off of the site, creating such a toxic environment that a lot of people kind of voluntarily leave the site, right? Or, the way that the site functions for the next few months because of this might result in some policy changes that might not have otherwise happened, good or bad, right? I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen, because it's also like Elon Musk is kind of an idiot, and I'm not, the way that he perceives or understands stuff that happens on the website doesn't seem to exactly line up with how it works. So he might look at all the right-wing harassment and think like he's doing a good job because both sides are angry, as he keeps saying.
On the one hand, I don't totally understand the people like panicking over this. Like, Oh my goodness, can you believe that Twitter is going to be run by one of these crypto-loving tech billionaire libertarian losers? Like, yeah, I can't imagine that. That's exactly who runs all the tech companies that we all use. Like you're pointing out, I do think it is worthwhile to talk about the specific individuals that he's like targeting for harassment in his own company. I mean, that's very fucked up. But in terms of this, like being able to be worked by this kind of faux outrage campaign, or like in terms of listening to these ideas about this left-wing bias that apparently exists in places like Twitter and Facebook and all these social networks, it doesn't seem like, even though he's like giving voice to this kind of rhetoric and he's retweeting memes to this effect or whatever, but it seems like his views on this are pretty par for the course among all these different social media companies who have proven time and time again, Facebook especially considering who sits on their board, are often very willing and open to listen to these kind of complaints about bias and trying to adjust their strategy and fix these non-existent censorship campaigns. Like Facebook is such a good example, because you look at, I mean, they say the exact same thing about this left-wing bias when it comes to Facebook. You look at the top performing Facebook pages and it's all Don Bongino and Ben Shapiro and all these weirdos. They're the people that dominate in the right-wing media that just dominates Facebook news feeds all around the world, basically. And they're still kind of very open to this idea that there's some kind of implicit left-wing bias that they need to make up for. So, like while Musk definitely seems to be more willing maybe than some others to like openly vocalize this, it doesn't seem like that's going to change all that much in terms of the ethos for how these social media sites are governed,
Yeah, I think it's also like it ends up being a sort of a distraction too, right? Because we should be thinking, Twitter's in of itself not the center of the universe, but it does feel that way because of who's on it, right? Entertainment, Hollywood's on here, Washington is on here, Silicon Valley's on here, New York City's media is on here. But, I think it is an opportunity, right, to think about, okay, well, if we don't like, or we are worried about this sort of situation, what is the type of social media network we would want, and what goes into it? Like, what sort of designs and what sort of values do we want to emphasize, and how do we want people to communicate, right? And do we want to have places where we can experiment with different types of moderation or different types of communities and different types of policies, right? I think our tendency is when a piece of tech is built to assume that it's there forever and all that can really be done is to tinker with it instead of destroy it and start back up or provide alternatives that take people away from it. And part of that is hard because we've all built up relationships on Twitter and connections to people and connection to audiences that you can't exactly migrate anywhere else. But then that should be like another challenge to think of, like, okay, so what kind of social media systems can we develop where you can port over that information, right, where they're interoperable with one another and you don't actually have to stay attached to one place or another if you're really concerned about it. Because I think, as it is, Twitter's a fun place and social media networks are a fun place to post, but if we do want them around, we should also think about if there is a purpose to them and what kind of purposes we want for them and how we can design these networks to confide with that. Do we really think Twitter is a public square? Then maybe do we want to design it as a public square? Do we want to design it as a place where people can make jokes with each other, share entertainment, or some blend of all of them? Or do we want dedicated spaces for any of that? And I think in the noise with Elon Musk, that stuff gets lost, understandably though, right? This is the richest man on the planet buying something that's of central concern to a lot of people who will, talk and write about it, right? But it's also an opportunity for us to say, okay, well, what should social networks look like in that case?
Well, what do you prefer? I like the idea of being able to migrate audiences and have some kind of central underlying, you could port email lists from place to place. You can get CRMs, let you kind of manage your relationships wherever you're doing business. What is the solution here? And that might be too broad of a question, but what could something better look like?
I think there's some options, right? Protocols are an interesting way where you want something that's open source, you want something that tries to protect data of users and prioritize user control and allow them to design the experience or allow them to decentralize as much as the operation as possible. You want, that interoperability I was talking about. You want adversarial interoperability where where even against the will of Twitter or Facebook or social or Instagram or any other social network, you don't have to be on that platform to use it or to access it. And if you want to leave it, you can, and you can figure out ways to connect to the people who are still in those places, whether it's as an audience or whether it's as, social connections and friends, right? I think a lot of the way that the social media world is carved up, it's closed gardens and everyone kind of accepts implicitly or is told to accept. You can only talk to these people if you're in this garden, right? But it shouldn't really have to be that way. It doesn't make sense if you really think or sit down and think about it, why you shouldn't be able to communicate with people on a network or platform, even if you're not connected to it, as long as you're on the internet in of itself, right? You should be able to have connections with people who are on Twitter or Mastodon or Tumblr without having to spend all the time in that community. The question is how do we build up the tools for that, right? And part of the problem is the corporations are never really going to build that stuff up in of themselves. The goal is to have audiences concentrated inside the walled garden so that they can, juice up the advertising business. And there are a lot of moving parts here that until they're kind of tackled, I think it's hard to construct that alternative, but should be still thought of and considered.
And it is, I think, quite funny when you take into account all these other right-wing alternatives that have been proposed or created, these right-wing Twitter alternatives, whether it's Parler or Gab or Truth Social or whatever, they keep kind of trying to make these different networks where they can be free of the kind of the apparent persecution that they're experiencing constantly. But it's just so funny how as much as they try to make these new networks happen, the thing that keeps them crawling back to Twitter, and the reason that, you're pointing out, the reason that Musk wanted to purchase Twitter in the first place is because of the audience that's there that they can't just recreate. And they've realized as well that they can't just cultivate an audience of right-wing freaks. Part of the dopamine hit of being online or being connected to people on Twitter or elsewhere is all the people that you hate as well, and all the people that are on there that you can't just magically make appear on these other competing networks. So it is funny in that context, considering how many folks have tried to kind of create this alternative versus Musk's approach to just buy the genuine article himself rather than try and create some half-assed new product that no one's gonna use. You do have to kind of hand it to him on that one.
Yeah, and right, that's been the strategy for a while. I mean, analogous to what happened with Tesla. I mean, buy something that's established and then build it up from there. And it'll work out for him. He doesn't have to make something like Truth Social, right? Which is, I mean, I haven't followed that in a while, but I'm not sure, however that's going on. Or the other one, I can't remember the other,
Getter.
The other, do you remember it? It was the one that had, kept having hacks where all the information of the conservative users was leaked, and Truth or something like that. I don't remember the name of it. But, like these social networks, I think, are an example, right, where it's hard to build one up, and it's hard to build one up that's secure and that people can use easily, and that works, and also has content moderation, and also is like able to keep the users on it. So yeah, why not just buy something else that someone else built up, and shitpost away on it? Added bonus, he already has fun on the website, and every time he uses it, he gets money. So
there's been a lot of people. I think the behavior has bordered, if not totally been hysterical, and a lot of people were airing out these fears, like, oh, Elon's gonna read your DMs, like. Probably not, like almost very likely not. They should be encrypted, but that doesn't seem like a real substantive risk, because it's like just not that making something illegal stops people from doing it, but like it would be a nightmare if people did that at Twitter, especially him. And on top of other claims and worries about his behavior and who he would promote and that kind of stuff, and that's all about his ownership. But like what has gotten like left out of this conversation, but should be talked about, is how the Saudis have been like a huge investor in Twitter for years.
Yeah, it'd be crazy if someone evil owned Twitter. That would be wild.
Right. And there was like a moment when he first floated the offer, the Saudis objected to it, and it just set up this dynamic where like if you kind of knew nothing and didn't have any context, you'd think like, oh wow, thank you MBS for stopping this deal.
Yeah.
But also, the Saudis had, covertly influenced staff inside to share information about Saudi users. Right. And you didn't get a lot of attention on that. So like there are elements of this that are ripe for exploitation with bad actors staffing this. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, I don't think some of the complaints about Elon running this are well-founded. I think it's just kind of a reactionary knee-jerk chattering cycle.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that it's also like you said, one, he doesn't have the company at all, too. So, if you are concerned about him and what he's going to do, I think it would behoove someone to wait a little bit also to see discussions about the policies that are going to be run out. Because, for the reason that we talked about before, there are limits to what he can do. He has to make some money back, but he has to preserve the money-making ability. But two, also, Twitter's been private before. Twitter has been run by a libertarian mystic before, who thinks that they or some project that they are associated with is going to save the world. Jack Dorsey deeply believed that Bitcoin was going to save the world, or is going to save the world. And it's also been run in periods where there were free speech maximalists who were insisting that that was the way that this platform needed to be run. And I mean, there were times that are analogous to what they are now. It's not pleasant, but it also wasn't the end of the platform. It just required, or eventually resulted in a large enough backlash where people did have to actually, consider alternatives, toning down the free speech maximalism, looking at alternatives to content moderation, trying to cultivate some goodwill and trust again after turning the website into a honeypot for assholes, as some, executive told one journalist, right? It's we've been here before. But I think that there is people are freaking out a little bit more about it because, again, it's the richest man in the world. He's an asshole. He runs factories that are, people call the most racist places that they've ever worked at. He runs a bunch of companies that also have products that don't really work and do what they're supposed to. It feels very much like that he runs on fumes and vaporware. So I understand people's, kind of frenzied desire to imagine the worst, but it's almost certainly going to just be a slightly dumber version of what we have now.
I think the question that I find interesting when you talk about kind of censorship and moderation and free speech is, the way that we've seen different social media companies, again, whether it's Facebook, whether it's YouTube, develop these kind of ties to the U.S. national security state, and how they start to engage in these campaigns of sometimes of censorship or of, we're seeing that a lot now, of course, with the Russia-Ukraine conflict and all these kind of Russian state media outlets being banned. We've seen the thing of like designating Chinese or Russian state media as state media, while of course pretending that state media in the West doesn't exist. We've seen these social media companies, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, be willing to kind of play ball with the national security establishment and engage in kind of this kind of moderation based on their goals. So that's kind of one thing that I'm interested in about if this deal does go through and if Musk does take over, what direction, if any, he's going to have on that kind of phenomenon, whether he actually means that Twitter should be a more of a free speech zone, or whether when it comes to these questions of like national security, whether he's going to be, or Twitter under Musk, if this goes through, is going to be willing to do the work of this kind of national security establishment, or whether he's going to push back against that in any way. Nothing he's ever done has really indicated that he would push back against it, as much as he's like a free speech advocate that he's painted himself to be.
Yeah, I think part of it is, I think like as you raised, a good point. There's the West. There is, of course, a bit of hypocrisy about state media and sponsorship and censorship and so on and so forth, right? I mean, in other countries, Noam Chomsky has talked at length about this. In other countries, the way that you control populations is violence and force, or in countries that are not explicitly democracies ostensibly, right? The way you're supposed to control people if it's an authoritarian regime is force. However, if you're in a democracy or a country that prides itself as like, a democracy, you can't really use force, and the real instrument that you have is inculcating people with beliefs that align with whatever the interests are, so that you don't have to use force, right? Indoctrination, narrowing of opinion, so on and so forth, right? So I think like on a base level, right, there doesn't have to be a lot of collusion amongst actors in the West, because like George Orwell said, right, if you get up to a certain position in society, or if you're in certain rungs of society, you just understand that there's certain things you don't think, or certain things that you don't contradict because it doesn't make sense to, and you're taught that over time or socialized into believing that, right? But then on the other hand, right, I think there's also the question of like, well, what kind of penetration and subservience would you see from Twitter and other social media policies in the United States, and I think that on the one hand, you probably, there's nothing really to stop, for example, other countries from infiltrating them like the Saudis did, right? The Saudis are shareholders in Twitter, and the Saudis also used Twitter to establish a spy ring so that they could uncover dissidents and presumably execute them, right? There's nothing really to stop them from doing that under their libertarian mystic Dorsey, and there's nothing really to stop them from doing that under Musk, whatever his politics are, which are likely libertarian in some fashion, right? There's not much to stop the state in of itself here at home from like demanding or insisting, as if I understand it correctly, right, access to someone's messages or stuff that are communications, right, as the federal government has done for pretty much all the platforms and services, and as the tech companies at first enthusiastically signed on to do, like as we found out during the PRISM program, right, thanks to the Snowden revelations, right? So I think, whatever Musk's beliefs are, there are larger limits that will just make him act and discipline him in a way where he's not really going to shake the boat too much, right? Not much you can do if the government comes knocking, demanding access to this or that record as Twitter is right now. Not much you can do to, even if it's a privately owned company, he's now subject to the demands of the bankers who gave him loan. Well, not subject to them, but he has to think about the bankers who gave him loans, right? So he has to do there's certain things he will and won't do with the company because they might impede his ability to pay back the loans, right? So he's still going to be limited in ways where he'll just act, and the company will probably act and look like the way it is before, and that means all the things that you pointed out before, right? It will likely still conform or comply with any request that might be made of it by security services or by the state in of itself, right? And it also will probably censor and continue to censor leftists or some dissidents while amplifying right wingers and people in their networks, right?
I'm also interested in exploring the economics of this deal, because you hit on this a few minutes ago, talking about how Musk is technically the richest man in the world, but how has he become the richest man in the world? It gets kind of confusing when you start to dig into this. Normally, you think of these wealthy industrialists as having created these hugely successful, profitable companies. And you would think this person that gets held up as being this genius inventor, industrialist, who's literally the richest man in the world, maybe would be such a person who's in charge of some immensely profitable, powerful company that produces this product that everyone has. Not the case with Musk, whose company doesn't really produce a lot of product, whose product has been, recalled. I think a few months ago, they recalled literally almost all of the Teslas that had been mass produced. It is not a profitable company. It's not really a successful company. The entire reason that Musk is as wealthy as he is entirely because of this stock speculation that really makes no actual sense. It's been completely artificially inflated. It's this massive Tesla bubble basically that's propelled him to this point. So when he's able to make this big deal for Twitter for spending, however, $42 billion or whatever it is, it's hard to understand where all that is actually coming from. How do the economics of this even work? It's all of this money is fake. You know what I mean? All of this money is fake to begin with. It's amazing that we're still kind of pretending that any of this makes sense. But apparently it does. But I don't understand it when I try to wrap my mind around it. As you heard from that butchered explanation of this.
I think, but the way that you explained it is, I think, the sense that most people have. Most people I think a lot of times there's a lot of effort made to paint some this or that financial thing or piece of news is a little bit too complex. But generally speaking, most people have a good bullshit meter, and when they hear people explain to them why something on the stock market is worth this amount of money, or why this financial instrument is this complex, and they smell bullshit, it's bullshit, right? The reason why why Tesla is worth $1 trillion. It really has nothing to do with any fundamentals that come with the company in of itself, right? A good deal of it has to do with the hype that he's able to generate on social networks, specifically Twitter, right? And the enthusiasm and the fanaticism that he can instill in supporters and investors that allow them to value the company more than the next 10 largest legacy car makers combined, right? And to make distorted projections about the future. And he can leverage that then, smartly, from the perspective of a capitalist. He can leverage it smartly as loans, where he can make, he can say, my company's worth this much, my stock is worth this much, even if it's not really worth this much. I should get real money and leverage that into other assets or into other investments. He, in this case, is getting $12.5 billion in loans from banks like Morgan Stanley and a few others that aren't named in the SEC filing, and then $13 billion in loans that are leveraged against his stock, right? And that is a smart move in of himself, where he doesn't really need to have the money. He just needs to have another company whose fate is tied to the fate of Twitter and his own stake in it. And basically allows him to leverage himself into buying something that he probably shouldn't be able to and wouldn't, be able to otherwise, unless he sold a significant or, sold a huge chunk of Tesla stock, which in of itself would, kind of defeat the purpose of then buying Twitter. If you want to keep that $1 trillion valuation, you don't want to sell a huge chunk of the company to buy another company, even if it's going to allow you to inflate the value of the previous one. So I think trust that instinct, trust that feeling in your stomach when it feels like bullshit, because it is. It's a lot, to a great extent it is bullshit, and it boils down to he's been able to convince people it's worth more than it is.
So another thing we wanted to get your thoughts on, Edward, was the reports that Biden is looking at canceling student debt. Some of it, a lot of it, maybe all of it. Those have all been floated. And then today, we were told that they're ruling out, like, everything's on the table except for $50,000 per person. You could infer that means nothing above $50,000. That's probably just going to be a limited amount, and people still don't have a lot of faith in any cancellation, any substantive cancellation. Have you been following this, and what are your thoughts and predictions on whether or not Biden's going to cancel some or any student debt?
I would love for him to cancel student debt, but he already held himself to less than $50,000, I think. Or the report said that he's definitely considering it, but it'll be less than 50,000. 10,000 has to be the floor. But really, I don't know. It feels like it makes sense. Like they can't decide that they're not going to forgive it right before elections, right? Or before midterms. And they can't do some bullshit amount, because that'll probably also be the same as saying that they're not canceling it, because people have been used to having their loans on pause, right? And reintroducing them at any level, even if you significantly reduce the amount, is going to be a huge disruptor to a lot of people's lives, right? This is the first time they haven't had to pay this onerous debt for a long time. And they haven't had to do it for 2 years, and suddenly you're reintroducing that cost. The only thing that really makes sense is forgiving it fully. He has the authority to do it. He campaigned on forgiving at least some of it, and then also promised that he would look into the matter with the education secretary. To me, it feels also like a political no-brainer, but I think reporting has said that some people in the administration are divided about it because they think it'd be a handout, or they think that he doesn't have the authority to do it, or they're worried about the effect on inflation. But ultimately it just boils down to, I think, I think there is a lot of bullshit that people do say in the administration and in economics about student debt, insisting that it's a handout to the rich, or it's a handout to highly educated groups who can pay for it anyway. One of the most popular arguments is that the median household or something has like no student debt, and one reason why the median household doesn't have student debt is because half of people in this country, more than half of these people in this country, if I remember correctly, don't go to college, and the people who do are not all wealthy private school elites who can afford to pay it off. It would be a huge act of wealth transfer and wealth redistribution, and a lot of the arguments against it essentially boil down to, I paid for it, and even though it was cheaper and easier for me to pay for it, it's unfair if you have to pay for it, if you don't have to pay for it, right? And you should repay the government, or the $1.2 trillion of loans that are outstanding right now. But I don't know, I think it's just it's hard to talk about, because it feels like such a simple common sense issue that you would get support politically from voters and be rewarded for doing it, and also just make people's lives better. And what is the point of having power if you're not going to make people's lives better, or even at the very least, in the most cynical way, in the most cynical viewpoint, like also get yourself reelected, right? Or get supporters to back you. And one way to do that would be to forgive student debt. But I don't know. I hope it's closer to 50,000 than 10,000, but we'll have to see.
Yeah, I love this idea that all these really super wealthy people are just struggling with all the student debt that they haven't paid back yet. It's always amazing when they kind of trot out these kind of arguments.
That's ridiculous.
Yeah, it's been funny seeing people start to like really freak out about it. You're seeing a freak out on the right about it. You're seeing it from the more austerity-minded liberals that are also freaking out about it. It's the kind of thing, like you pointed out, Edward. It's like they don't need votes in Congress or anything to do this. Like we've talked about this a couple of times. This is something Biden could just do. I don't doubt that all the the consultants that work with the party have been taking a look at the Biden's approval rating for young people, and I'm sure that's going into this decision. I think it would be cool if they actually went through with it. I guess it's the kind of thing that nothing about Biden's career or nothing about the last year and a half or so has indicated that they have ever any intention of doing stuff beyond talking about these positive things. And they seem to want the credit, like we've talked about before, the credit for saying, whether it comes to the Build Back Better framework or whatever, they love to get media people talking about how progressive they are with these bold plans that they have that never seem to materialize. So it would be great if they actually did it and it actually helped a few people. Like with any big promise of a big, bold, progressive agenda that gets promised either from liberals, either in Canada or the United States or elsewhere, my general viewpoint would be should wait till the thing has actually happened before celebrating over it and not give any credit for suggesting this stuff, because I think that's what they want to have it both ways, where they can be framed as being these big progressive champions for mentioning these things without ever actually going through it and inevitably pissing people off on the right or in their own party about it. So I would hold off on the celebrations until this moment actually comes.
I mean, yeah, I don't know. I mean, like, are you hopeful? Like, and secretly, in your heart of hearts, do you hope that it's going to happen or see it happening?
I think they're going to try to please everyone. And what that might look like is something a little bit more than $10,000 per person, but not $50,000, not full cancellation. And they'll probably means test it. On the campaign, Biden had claimed one time that he wanted to cancel, what was it, 100% of the debt if you made under $125,000 a year and went to a public school or an HBCU. Noble. That's a lot. It's not enough, but it's a lot. And that doesn't really get mentioned often, but he said it in a campaign event live stream with Don Cheadle. So he was kind of all over the board in his promises.
You're going to lie to Don Cheadle, sir? Come on.
Right. So I think it's just going to be, like, if I had to guess, like maybe 20,000.
Yeah, I can see that.
I could see them also like adding all kinds of caveats onto it as well. That's the kind of when these people kind of get their hands on these what should be no-brainer ideas to cover as many people as possible, and all the caveats are going to get added. If you start a business in a economically disenfranchised area that's profitable for 3 years, and you earn under $75K and went to this specific school, then possibly you might have access to some tax relief on loans. And, it's like, it would be great if they could just do the thing and help as many people as possible. It's just that's inevitably with neoliberals, the direction that these things inevitably end up going. So, again, I would be happy. I know plenty of Americans with student debt. I'd be thrilled for them if this actually worked out.
Yeah, disclosure, conflict of interest. I have student debt. You know?
Yeah.
So I'm biased on this issue.
Yeah. Well, it's like, I think this is one thing that, like, because obviously, people have student debt in Canada as well. I went to school in Quebec and was born here. So it's like my education was quite cheap. I didn't have to take on these big, like, 6-figure loans. That's one thing, though, that when I see Americans sharing online about their debt, their student debt that they've taken on, and like I've spent 10 years paying this debt, and I actually owe more now than when I started paying it.
Oh, God.
And these kind of things. And that's the kind of thing that when I see that, I just wonder how this is legal, how it's been allowed to continue, how there's not people just rioting over the streets over it. Like, people have really spent, decades of their lives paying off these loans and not even put even a dent into these loans. It's extremely, just inherently wrong and predatory. Especially when these are young people, essentially, that are, say, if you want to go to school, you have to take out these loans because of the cost of education. Very young people are making these decisions, and then, decades later, they're still under the thumb of this like really crushing debt. It's extremely radicalizing to even see this stuff. So I can imagine being caught up in this cycle yourself, and why it would be really appealing to possibly have some alleviation of that.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe he'll surprise us. No, he won't.
That's funny.
Yeah.
Well, you're just gonna have, in those midterms are coming up, you're just gonna have to vote extra hard. Vote blue extra hard this time.
I know
you voted blue. Yeah, I know you voted blue no matter who last time. You voted your ass off last time. This time, though, even more. You're gonna vote even harder. Then maybe they'll think about it. They'll put together a committee to take a look at this.
It'll be good. I mean, we'll have a nonpartisan or bipartisan committee to investigate.
There we go. You can throw that on a bumper sticker.
Hell yeah. Everybody loves a bipartisan committee.
I think that's all we had, Edward. But thanks a lot for joining us on the program today. It was great to talk to you about all this stuff.
Thanks for having me, y'all. It was great talking with both of y'all.
Where can people find your work?
I'm on Twitter at Big Black Jacobin. And I'm at Vice at Motherboard, where I write about labor and tech and crypto.
Thank you for joining us.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to The Insurgents. Please remember to subscribe over at theinsurgents.substack.com. Find the podcast on all your favorite podcast apps. And please remember to leave a review on Apple Podcasts. It's very helpful and we appreciate it a lot. But please, again, don't mention Ken Klippenstein in the review. He is banned from the show. It's a lifetime ban. So please do not mention him in the review. And we'll be back later this week with more of the content that you know and love. Goodbye.